This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the show. All right, I have to apologize first for taking yesterday off, but you know how tax collectors are? Okay, well, I'll tell you. I had to help my dear old gray-haired mama get a couple of things resolved because let's face it, the tax collector doesn't want excuses. He, she, or they wants the tribute. And so, anyway, I was taking care of business yesterday, but today I have Eric Peters. And Eric, this is becoming more and more common. You and I rarely have to cast about for, gee, what could we possibly talk about? It's like, right. Okay, what can't we cover today? Where would you like to begin?
Well, let's see. Should we start with the Reichstag fire, or should we start with the arrests are coming?
Let's start with the Reichstag fire. Okay. Give us some context here. People who don't know about the original Reichstag, that was the catalyst for bringing the Nazis into power in Germany back in 1933.
Well, and specifically for the suspension of civil liberties, for the protection of the people, is the way that it was framed. And they hung that on the shoulders of a young communist who supposedly was the guy responsible. And it's still murky whether he was a patsy or whether he actually did it. But the point is that it became the pretext for essentially a declaration of martial law and the persecution of people who dared to question the regime. And so fast forward 80 years, and here we are. And the governor of Pennsylvania's house gets torched by a guy who apparently is on the left and probably some kind of a communist. And I think it's very possible that that's going to be framed as an anti-Semitic act because, of course, Josh Shapiro, the governor, is Jewish. And this could provide the perfect pretext, by equating anybody who dares to criticize what's going on in Israel or the actions of the government of Israel as being essentially the same thing as firebombing somebody's house.
That is scary. And it's not without precedent. This is one of the biggest disappointments that I have with Trump and his current administration is how hard he is in the bag for Israel, and particularly to the point that we're seeing anti-free speech laws being enacted and enforced simply for those who criticize Israel, as if, criticizing what Israel is doing to the people in Gaza would be akin to saying, oh, yes, and, because I think pedophilia is bad, the Catholic Church, therefore, shouldn't exist either. What?
Yeah. Isn't it astounding? And particularly coming from, in general terms, our side, our side that was outraged by the way the left attempted to frame any questioning of the left as some sort of criminal pathological thing that deserved to be prosecuted and people deserve to be shut up and marginalized. And now the right is doing the exact same thing. And Trump, either he doesn't care or he's so thoughtless that he doesn't appreciate that all he's doing is essentially affirming everything that was done under the 4 years of Biden. It's just focused in a slightly different direction, but the principle remains.
It's tough because people who've basically tied their principles to Trump's personality or to MAGA or whatever it is, they're going to go whichever way the current is carrying them, as opposed to being anchored in what is right, what is good, what is sound, and it's very frustrating to see people who are again, like you said, on our side, caught up in this.
Sure. And how did we ever arrive at the point where to criticize the policies of a government, of a state, and we're talking about the state of Israel and the government of Israel, how did that somehow become race hatred?
Yeah, it's because that is a powerful manipulative tool, and those who are in power will use it to their advantage as best they can.
Yeah, and this is something that is a natural evolution of everything that's been going on for the last 50 years. For a long time, you couldn't dare say anything in public about, for example, affirmative action, because if you question that, well, obviously you hate black people. Obviously you're a racist.
Yeah, let's talk for a moment. When someone is confronted with something like that, well, you're just racist, you're homophobic, you're whatever. When the names start calling and they start applying the labels, what is a good response to that?
Well, I think just to stick with the facts and not allow them to impugn your motives. Thomas Sowell did a really good job of that when he was one of the few voices in the wilderness way back in the 80s when he would criticize the affirmative action policies, which of course they're race-based and they favor one race. And so, how is it racist to point out this is wrong? You're setting aside groups of people based on the color of their skin, and you're advantaging some and you're disadvantaging others. And isn't that what racism is? And isn't that bad? Those are facts, and I think facts are powerful. And if you just stick to the facts and don't be shied away by somebody trying to frame your motives as bad, that's the key. They want to make you feel like ashamed or guilty about presenting facts. Don't be. Just present the facts. Let the facts speak for themselves.
And I think it helps to have the attitude. You can say there. Paul Rosenberg used to talk about this. Call me Pisher. A pisher it's a Yiddish term for a person who, although an adult, still pees their pants. In other words, it's someone not very bright and kind of repulsive. But the idea is you can call me whatever you want. It's not going to change, how I stand or what my principles are. So, hit me with your best shot, but those buttons you're trying to push, they're not connected to anything.
Well, Bryan, thank you for giving me a new word to add to my vocabulary. I love that. I'd never heard that term before, and it's perfect.
Yeah, and it's liberating, as you well know. When you get to the point where people can call you names, and like you said, you instead of going off on the tangent of defending yourself, well, I'm not that. You stick to the facts. If they persist, hey, call me whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that now you're in a place where you're not manipulative, or you're not being manipulated, rather, by their mere words and the fear of being, thought of poorly by someone else.
Absolutely. And, this isn't just an academic question any longer. We're talking about things that are deeply important, as regards what's going on in the Middle East and Israel. We're talking about people, women, children, old people, innocent people being wholesale slaughtered. And that's wrong. And, to be placed in the position of, you hate Jews because you're pointing out that, hey, it's really not proper to be indiscriminately killing kids, women, old people, anybody who happens to get in the way. That's just a morally obnoxious thing.
Hear, hear. Yep. And there's another principle that underlies this, and sometimes we forget about this because we're trying to be nice. We want to get along with people, right? We want people to think, well, he's a decent fellow. He doesn't treat others bad. But you have no obligation to feel how someone else tells you have to feel. So when they're waving that flag of outrage, if that's not something over which you need to feel outraged, you have no obligation. The measure of what you contribute to the world is what you do, not how you feel.
Correct. And I think we should draw lessons from history. There was a time when, for example, we would teach kids about how atrocious it was, what was done to the American Indians in this country. And there was a famous cavalry officer, I can't forget who it was, who said something about justifying the slaughter of Indian children because nits beget lice. That was the term that he used. Right. And this is the same kind of terminology that the people who are running things over there in Israel are using. They're saying essentially that everybody who happens to be not an Israeli is essentially a subhuman. And, it's proper to exterminate them because they might at some future point do something that is worrisome to the state of Israel.
Wow. Hey, speaking of contrived outrage, why do I get the feeling that our chain is being yanked a little bit with the bail reduction for this Carmelo Anthony kid in Texas who apparently knifed another kid to death for telling him to leave his seat where he wasn't supposed to be?
Yeah, it seems like they're trying to seed the ground for another summer of love. You and I were talking a little bit about that off the air. There's no reasonable justification for letting that kid out. The kid committed a gratuitously horrific, violent act, and yet they let him out. So it begs the question, why? Well, it seems like whoever was the person responsible for that decision did it because they know it's going to inflame the understandable anger of people who are appalled by what he did. And what's the purpose of that? Well, it could just be to, again, ignite another series of peaceful protests this summer. I fully expect something like that to happen. If not over this, then it'll be over something else.
And I guess that's a reason for us, for anybody within earshot, to be cautious. If you feel an emotional surge based on a headline or something that you see posted on social media, that's always a good excuse to stop and step back for just a moment and ask, okay, is someone trying to make me feel this way? In other words, am I being manipulated, or is this, an authentic, organic reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you discern the pattern, you'll see that they're trying to goad us, and they goad us one against the other, whether it's blacks against whites, whether it's women against men, whatever it is, because that keeps us preoccupied and it prevents us from focusing on the actual source of our problems.
Hear, hear. Well, let's talk for a moment about. We had a couple other things to cover here. Real ID. There's been a lot of news about this. You and I have talked about this a lot over the years, but it looks like the moment of decision is fast approaching.
Yes, and it's approaching faster with the encouragement of the Trump administration. Isn't it fascinating how when you vote for people that you think are going to do at least something to protect your liberties and maybe give you a little more freedom, that somehow you always end up getting less? We had that under the George Bush years, and now here we are again. Of all people, Trump and Noam are pushing this real ID thing. You and I saw this coming. We were both worried before Trump was elected that all this talk about dealing with the problem of the influx of the illegal aliens and all of that was going to lead to some kind of a regime of internal passports. Well, here we are. That's exactly what they're going to do. And if people think that it's going to be limited to air travel, right now, if you don't have that real ID come, what is it, May 7th or something?
Yes.
You can't board a domestic flight. It's not even any longer about leaving the country. You can't fly from one state to another unless you have this official government real ID. Well, logically, at some point, it's going to end up being, maybe you aren't allowed to travel from state to state, even if you do it in your own car. Maybe they're going to erect checkpoints at the borders and of the states, and you'll have to present your ID. It's an absolutely terrible idea, and it's absolutely appalling that it's being pushed by the side that supposedly was elected to dial back that sort of stuff.
Well, and I'm very disturbed to see the number of people on the right who are, what's the big deal? And I don't know if it's because we want to have secure elections, don't we? And it's like that's not the point. This is one of those final puzzle pieces into making your ID a government-granted privilege, which is a very dangerous thing.
And people should understand something. It's an important distinction. Your current driver's license is perfectly secure, and nobody has a problem with, I don't have a problem. I don't think most people have a problem with being expected to produce that ID in order to vote. That's not what's at issue. These real IDs have biometric identifiers and RFID chips, meaning they transmit while you're carrying them and can be read while you're carrying them. So effectively, it's a kind of cattle tag. It's an electronic cattle tag. And unlike your cell phone, which does the same thing, you can leave your cell phone at home, right? You don't have to carry that thing with you. You can if you want to. It's convenience, but you don't have to. On the other hand, it's problematic to go out for a drive in your car without carrying your driver's license because you never know. You might get pulled over for something, and then you don't have the driver's license. You can't go to the bank and cash a check or deposit a check without that driver's license, without that ID. So if you have this real ID, you're a walking transponder, and they can keep track of you at all times. And that's one of the very problematic things about it.
Yep. And the fact that they took 20 years to slow track this and just carefully thread it into society. Because the pushback back in 2005, when this was introduced, and if I'm not mistaken, I think this was introduced by the same people who brought us the Patriot Act.
Correct.
People were like, no, we're not going to do that. States stood up and said, we are absolutely not going to do it. And one by one, they've all fallen in line.
They've all fallen in line, and they're marginalizing people. Again, it's of a piece with what happened during the pandemic. They are saying, you don't have to get the real ID, but if you don't have one, you can't fly anymore. You can't leave the country anymore. And what next? Will it be that you can't travel outside of your state? Will it be that you can't enter a store any longer? Just like they were threatening to make it so you couldn't enter a store if you didn't have your vaccine passport. It's all the same thing, and they just keep repackaging it and rebranding it.
And I appreciate the fact that you bring up the word passport, because people who've been asking, what is the big deal? I've been trying to think of what's the best way to summarize this. And it's setting the stage for that internal passport. That is dangerous beyond, words.
Of course it is. And it's astounding to me. It's depressing to me that so many Americans have become so passive about accepting something like that. Now, you and I are old enough to remember a different America where we still had the very real living memory of the Soviet Union. And there was always this kind of caricature of the Soviet Union where these, heel-clicking costume government geeks were at every corner demanding to see your papers. And you'd see the poor people who had to bow their heads and, here's my papers. Am I allowed to go here? Am I allowed to go there? And Americans looked at that and thought, I'm so glad I live in a country where we don't have to do that sort of thing. Americans have become habituated to that sort of thing. I mean, like I was saying a moment ago, you go to the bank and the teller demands to see your ID, not just look at it, but scan it. Have you noticed how they do that?
Oh, yeah.
And you buy liquor at the store, and it's not just let me see your ID, see it, so I can confirm, that you're old enough to buy booze, even if you're obviously, well over 50. and any idiot can see that you're over 18, they still will scan your ID. So what's that all about? It's not about confirming your age. It's about tracking you.
Yeah, I just can't believe there aren't more people that are, that have a sense of outrage over that. Why would they do that? Well, I guess it's to keep me safe. I don't know what it is. We're very passive about this.
That's just that. Well, people really, for the sake of convenience, because as Ned Beatty put it in Deliverance, we don't want any trouble here. They're willing to go along. It defeats me. I remember when during the Bush years, when they came out with the Homeland and the TSA, and they started expecting people to queue up as if they'd been arrested for something and were just being processed into the clink. Raise their hands, spread their legs, and let some government person put their hands on their, on their genitals and rifle through their possessions, not because they've given them any reason, just because, we just do this to everybody now because you're a presumptive terrorist. And people put up with that because, I want to be able to go to Disneyland this year. I can't sacrifice going to Disneyland this year. That's just too much for me.
Well, I'm preparing to take what I guess will be probably my last airplane flight for a while at the end of the month here. Because I have no intention. I've got to renew my driver's license in December, and I think you still have the option in the state of Idaho, but there's warning signs everywhere. You've got to have the gold star if you want the real ID, and I don't want it. And if that means I don't get to fly anymore, well, then I guess it means I don't get to fly anymore. I'll just John Madden my way wherever I need to go.
Yeah, me too. And I hope that, enough people will do what you're doing and what I plan to do. Mine's up for renewal next year, and just not comply. If enough of us do that, then it becomes unenforceable. I talk on this a lot, but, back to the masks and the pandemic. If 20%, all it would have taken is 20%, maybe even a little bit less than that, had absolutely refused to go along with the kabuki, just said, no, I'm not going to do it, it would have been very difficult for them to maintain the kabuki. And it's the same with all of this stuff, including the real ID.
Hear, hear. Well, I would invite anybody else who has similar concerns. Feel free to join our ranks. There may not be many of us, but hey, I'm down to keep you company during our bus ride, to wherever we're going for vacation. All right.
Yep, exactly.
One final question for you. Just wanted to touch base on things automotive. I noticed that you were reviewing the Honda Pilot. And since I'm driving, I have a 2016 Honda Pilot, but I'm curious for 2025, what's the good news? What's the bad news? It's a pretty solid vehicle.
Yeah, it's a very solid vehicle, and it's exceptional because it still comes standard with a V6, which I'm convinced within a matter of a couple of years is going to become almost an exotic thing. Something that we have taken for granted as a people for many decades will become exotic. You look around and see how many even luxury badged vehicles now come with little four-cylinder engines, and it's all because of the federal regulations, which, by the way, Trump is doing next to nothing about while he's talking about tariffs and all of these other things. So, here you have a vehicle that 10 years ago would have been regarded as, it's just another crossover, no big deal. Now it's become, wow, look, it has a V6. It doesn't have a turbocharged 4, and it doesn't have a hybrid drivetrain. Wow. So, get them while you can, because in all likelihood, Honda's going to have to pull the V6 out of that one too. It's the last vehicle along with the Ridgeline, which is based on the Pilot, that still has the V6, which you used to be able to get in the Accord. You can't anymore. The Accord only comes with a little turbo hybrid four-cylinder engine now. Wow.
Again, this is I was really hoping Trump might turn some of this back. I think you wrote on this the other day. Trump does give some lip service to the idea of, we need to turn back, some of these regulations, but he's not talking about doing away with them so much.
No. So, again, isn't it of a piece with the way instead of getting rid of Obamacare, they started talking about repeal and replace. In other words, we're going to keep it. We're just going to do it a little bit differently this time. So instead of saying, the government really has no rightful business, either constitutionally or morally, decreeing how many miles per gallon your car should get, no matter how much it costs you, we're going to get out of that altogether. And people who want to buy a 10 mile per gallon car can buy one. People who want to buy a 50 mile per gallon car can buy one. Instead of saying that, he says, well, what we're going to do is roll back the regulatory standards to 2020. So it's not going to make much change. It's just going to prevent the accelerated push for the electric cars only. And what happens 3-4 years from now when Trump gets replaced by another Kamala Harris or Joe Biden character who's going to go right back and kick those standards back up to something absolutely ridiculous? The only way to deal with this is to end it, not mend it, as they always say.
Hear, hear. Eric, great as always to visit with you. I guess keep your hat on tight. We've got a fun week ahead of us and probably more hijinks on the way.
Well, maybe the arrest will be coming soon, too. Thanks, Brian.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, I want people to go to Eric's website, ericpetersautos.com. I've got a link in my show notes at thebrianhydeshow.com. You are looking for the show notes for April 15th. Happy Tax Day 2025.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.